Welcome to the Pacific Research Institute Next Round podcast. I'm Tim Anaya, PRI's Vice President of Marketing and Communication, and your podcast co-host. This week we have a very special guest, Catherine Reheis-Boyd, who's the President and CEO of the Western States Petroleum Association, one of the most powerful and important legislative advocates in California. Catherine and Wayne talk about legislation that's being considered here in the final weeks of the legislative session that would make it more difficult and more expensive to produce the oil and gas that's needed to fuel our economy, ensure Californians can afford to fill up their tanks so they can go to work and school, and really ensure that we have a more affordable quality of life for all Californians. The end of session legislation comes in light of the announcements by Phillips 66 that they're going to be closing a major refinery in Los Angeles, and Valero that they will be closing a major refinery in Benicia. And Catherine and Wayne talk about what the impact of these closures would be on consumers, and whether the end of session legislation that's being considered would make a difference in keeping these refineries open. They also talk about government green mandates being pushed by state government that are driving production and refining out of the state, despite the fact that total greenhouse gas emissions have been declining in the U.S. since 2007, despite an increase in oil and gas production. And finally, they wade into the upcoming legislative battle over the renewal of cap-and-trade legislation. I think you'll find that it's a very interesting discussion, and it's a very important one, as the legislation that they discuss really will have a major impact on the lives of all Californians. So stay tuned. After this message, we'll have our conversation with Winegarden and Catherine Reheis-Boyd. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll get back to Next Round in just a moment, but first, are you getting PRI's regular email updates? If not, go to pacificresearch.org and click the sign up button at the top of the page to get the facts you need to fight back delivered every week to your inbox. Every week, PRI sends you what you need to know about what's going on in Washington, D.C. and Sacramento, and gives you the free market ideas needed to save our state and our nation. By going to pacificresearch.org and clicking the sign up button, you can sign up to have Policy Alert, our weekly roundup of all the best ideas from PRI scholars delivered to your inbox. Or you can sign up for event updates so you're the first to know when PRI is coming to your community with great events. So sign up now at pacificresearch.org and click the sign up button at the top of the page to get PRI's content delivered to your inbox each week.
Well, Catherine, we're so happy to have you here with us today. I'm really talking about such an important topic, which is energy and the environment. How do we have affordable energy, and how do we also keep emissions down and keep the economy growing? Unfortunately, it's been very easy to be pessimistic about California's energy industry for quite some time. And the announcement that Phillips 66 refinery in Los Angeles and the Valero refinery in Benicia, they're going to be closing, and that seems to just be another example of the state's energy dysfunction. So before we discuss the implications of these announcements, could you discuss the reasons why refineries are shutting down? And is this part of a broader global trend like the governor's asserted?
Well, thank you for that question, because it's a really important one. And this conversation that we're having is at such a pivotal time. I know your readers are going to be, and your viewers are going to be very interested in the next 30 days of going through the legislative session, because some very important issues are on the table, and the urgency of action is absolutely essential given sort of where we find ourselves. So the fact that 2 refineries announced that they would be closing, or the potential to close, really woke up people to the fact that California's infrastructure and investment is not where it needs to be for us to continue as an industry to provide the fuel that Californians demand every single day. And unfortunately, if we are going to lose, we already know Phillips 66 is closing in Southern California. They certainly will have some imports to meet their contractual arrangements. But the Valero announcement of potential sale in April 26 really got people's attention. Between those 2 refineries, that's 20% of the capacity that California needs to meet its demand. Now, Wayne, I think you you know, demand in California has not gone down to the level that the California Air Resources Board had predicted. And the problem with that is we have strong demand. And as an economist, you know better than I, a strong demand, low supply only means increased cost. So we have to stabilize the market. We have to stabilize the industry so that today and tomorrow we can continue to provide 40 million people who drive 32 million cars and trucks every day, that they can continue to operate, move, economy growing, while we look at where we're going to transition into the future. And this conversation is critical. If we do not make these decisions in this end of the legislative session, it will put at risk an additional couple refineries that will close. And then the conversation you and I will be having will be very different.
That is terrifying. That is absolutely terrifying. I want to stick with this for a moment for exactly what you just said. I mean, this is so important. So kind of diving into the implications for consumers and businesses. And you just said that California should expect prices to increase. Do we have a sense of how much prices could increase? And is there a potential for gas shortages? And are there any other impacts that we could expect?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And again, I think you've had Dr. Mache on from USC. You've heard his projections of $8 to $10, per gallon of gasoline. You've heard other economists speak to this. But that basically is saying, if we do not change course, if we do not make some urgent actions in two areas in this legislative session, then that could very well be the future of California. And those two things are, one is near and dear to your heart, which is sending the right signal to the market that California is open for business. It wants investors to invest money. And that signal has to be literally from the California Energy Commission. You must pause this idea of putting a cap on refinery profits. That is in play in this last part of the session. And if that signal is not sent, then you will have investors who have no interest in investing in these refiners or producers in California. An example, Wayne, when Valero announced they were going to potentially close their refinery in Benicia, the next day their stock prices went up because the investors were so happy they would leave California into places that actually want them and they can have a return on investment. So that is what the signal has to turn that around for not only Valero to have a different consideration and a different decision, but also for the next two refineries who are literally waiting to see what happens in this last part of the legislative session. And that company is PBF, Refinery in Southern California, Refinery in the North, who have been very vocal in public that if they don't get crude oil in these pipelines from Kern County into their refineries, they will not be able to operate in a way that's sustainable for them. So when you're hearing not only about the refining side, you're hearing about the connection to production. And, we are blessed in Kern County with probably the largest strategic petroleum reserve in the ground. We just can't drill for it because we can't get permits from the state of California. So what you're going to hear in the legislature, why this is so important, why your listeners should tune in to next week. This is all going to be discussed at a hearing at the Assembly on Wednesday, where the agencies, the Energy Commission, the Air Resources Board, will be brought in to talk about what are the actions that you're going to be taking in the next very soon before the session ends that can send the right signal to the market, get production flowing from Kern County to these refineries, deal with the cap and trade discussion going on in a way that keeps the program going but doesn't put additional cost. You've got to stop the cost burning on these companies while we figure out how we transition to the future. Has to happen.
So, and that's something I didn't recognize and is part of kind of what they have to do. And I completely understand, and it makes perfect sense that with the profit cap, we're just not going to get there. But is getting more actual production of oil and drilling for oil, that's also part of the kind of solution to the refinery issue as well. I don't think a lot of people are going to make that connection. I think that's really important.
Thank you, Wayne, because not naturally people would know that, right? But we've been talking a lot about it for this very reason. There are certain refiners that are positioned very well to take Kern County crude and have pipelines from the Central Valley to their facility. The easiest way to get a refinery to be more profitable is to also look at where they have to get their crude oil. And they would much rather prefer to get it from Kern County in a pipeline to their facilities. It costs about $1 a barrel to do that. If you can't do that and you have to ship it into your refineries through the ports of LA, Long Beach, San Francisco from 40 days away on a marine tanker, it's about $4 to $5, $6 a barrel. So right off the bat, as a refiner, you're gonna want domestically produced California crude. We have a boatload of it in Kern County. It's a very technical term, Dwayne. It's a boatload in Kern County that can be produced as much as if we can get permits from the government to do so. So this idea of codifying the Kern County EIR, which has been litigated about 5 times, I believe, to allow permits to be issued to these producers in Kern County, getting this locally produced, cost-effective, environmentally safe, greenest crude you can produce out of Kern County to these refiners in a way that is very supportive of the economy, jobs, tax revenues, less greenhouse emissions than putting it on a tanker 40 days away to get it here. All the right things to do. This is the low-hanging fruit. Make sure you codify the EIR. Make sure you bring more supply to California. Make sure these refiners can get it easily and effectively and more cost effectively. And let them produce gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel, which is absolutely necessary when demand by the consumer is strong, as it still is, and supply is being constrained. You know, we say technical realities get in the way of aspirational dreams or goals, and hope is not a plan. So we need a plan that is based on addressing technical realities so we can get from here to there. And I would say, Wayne, nobody in this conversation is in any way debating the importance of climate change goals in California, of California's desire to be a leader. We just want that leadership to include this industry who has to sustain what the consumers demand today, tomorrow, and in the near future, midterm, until we get to this diversified portfolio future that we all want. And the only other thing I would say, Wayne, is that we believe that it's an all of the above energy strategy. We do not believe that you should put all your egg in the electricity bucket. It is a piece, absolutely, of the diversified portfolio. But so is hydrogen, so is renewable diesel, so is biodiesel, so is wind, solar, hydrogen, carbon capture, sequestration. It's all important as the mix for the future. So we just believe there's a way to diversify, bring costs down, stabilize the market, send a signal to the investors, allow these refiners and producers to continue to be viable businesses, stabilize the market, and then move into the next piece, which is the transition to the future. So that's how we see it. We hope others see it that way, because to tell you the truth, if we stay on the path we're on, I think it jeopardizes the future of sustainability and a lower carbon economy.
I agree with you, Catherine. I mean, that one of the things we've been looking at, and you touched on it. I was going to mention it later, but I'll bring it up now, which is the irony that we discourage production in California, which would be lower emission oil. Like when you go and you drill for it, you get less emissions from then, if you go to Iraq or Brazil, they have, which California is importing, right? Those are major importers of oil into California. And yet that actually is worse for global emissions, which if you're talking about global climate change, it's the global emissions that matter. I don't know if you have any kind of further comments, but that's one of the things that I think is so troubling in terms of our current approach, is that sometimes intentions versus reality. And it's ironic that we're discouraging jobs, production, and lower emissions by forcing us to Californians to consume oil from elsewhere.
Oh, Wayne, I couldn't summarize it better than that. I mean, you did an excellent job. And the other problem is we have ports of LA and Long Beach that are very congested. And so this idea that we can somehow just import everything into supplying the California market is not realistic. You can ask the Port of LA and Long Beach. They will say the same thing. And we have other regulations regulations that we are dealing with from the California Air Resources Board called at birth. What is an at birth regulation? It was passed in January of this year. And basically, there is no technology available to put on a stack of a large ship in the Port of LA and Long Beach to capture emissions. And there is not the availability of plugging in with these big ships into these ports at the moment. Yet we have a regulation that says you have to do that. And so we cannot comply with a regulation that does not have technology available. The result of this is basically limiting vessel traffic into the Port of LA and Long Beach. So I'm trying to figure out the plan here. If we can't produce it here, we can't refine it here, we can import some of it, but in no way, given where we are with the Port of LA and Long Beach or San Francisco, that we could supply the market. So that only means, again, as an economist, this path we are on basically will limit supply and increase cost jobs, and here we have a budget deficit in California. It'll cost taxes, it'll cost revenue, it'll cost jobs, it'll cost our ability to be independent, energy independent, not reliant on a lot of the geopolitical things that happen. We have got to right size the ship now. And this in no way takes away from the environmental protections that California is so prominent on. So in my opinion, the only way we ever get to the future, and I think you have said this yourself, you have got to balance the economy and the environment. These are not just words. They have to have both so that the right policy is put in place to move us forward. Both are achievable. This is not an issue of not being able to figure this out. We just have to have the political will to do it. And I am encouraged, I would say, that this is the first time in a long time that this conversation is happening in a way that I hope will be intentional and impactful. We weren't having the conversation. We're now having the conversation of urgent actions that must be taken to turn this around. I just hope we can come together within the governor's office, the legislature, the Energy Commission, the Air Resources Board, the Department of Conservation, who issues a lot of permits and is part of this debate, and also Kern County, who has been very much at the table, saying we have already done all of the protections of the California Environmental Quality Act. We've checked every box. We've mitigated everything for the future. We just need to issue permits to drill for this valuable resource so we can get it into pipelines, get it to refiners, preserve these jobs, stabilize the market, and go forward. I don't know, Wayne, how does that sound to you?
You know, from your lips to God's ears.
We'll get back to our great guest in just a moment. But first, are you following PRI on Facebook? By following PRI at facebook.com/Pacific Research Institute, that's all one word, you'll be the first to read free market ideas from PRI's terrific team of scholars on all the hot issues like education freedom, single-payer healthcare, crime, homelessness, green mandates like the ban on natural gas appliances, and more. Plus, when you follow PRI at facebook.com/Pacific Research Institute, you'll be the first to know when tickets go on sale for PRI's must-attend luncheons, dinners, and galas across the state. And you'll be first in line to secure your spot to hear great speakers like Michael Schellenberger, Gordon Chang, Steve Hilton, and many more. So go to facebook.com/Pacific Research Institute and follow PRI today so you'll be the first to know.
I guess the question is, because the governor's come out with his plan and legislator leaders is it adequate, or is where the conversation is now, if this is where it ended? I mean, because we don't have the lifting of the profit cap long-term going on. How far are we from a sustainable solution of keeping that 20% of capacity we're about to lose?
Thank you. It's a great question. And yesterday, there were 4 of these items on the California Energy Commission's agenda for adoption. 2 of those were adopted. One was looking at resupplies in refineries, holding minimum inventories, going into rulemaking to discuss those issues. A good action. Helpful, but some rulemaking that will discuss issues for further action. The number one issue is sending the market signal on the refinery margin cap. And that was pulled from the agenda because I don't think we all were able to come to a conclusion of what a market signal would be. And it has to be substantial. We think you should repeal any kind of a margin cap penalty at all. That would be the best way to send a signal to investors that California is actually open for business and interested in investment. If the state cannot find itself to do that, it has to be something substantial. These companies make their decisions 10, 20 years out. So if there's nothing in that period of time that's going to come forward, it will not send a signal to investors. So it's now on the September agenda for the energy. So we've got to come together on that. The conversations have to continue to get something that's going to matter. And then in the legislative side, the Kern County production piece has to happen. Of course, we'd love supply throughout the entire state, not just Kern County, but the Kern County piece has to go through.
Well, I would love to talk about this all day, but I probably should move on to kind of some of the global climate change issues. I mean, that is obviously the flip side of what we're talking about. But I think there are some things that people don't recognize. I mean, something we've been shouting about, but you can always mention this to someone that doesn't realize our emissions as a nation are down 20% compared to 2007. I mean, we are already a much more energy efficient, innovative economy. And that's because of fossil fuels, right? It's because of increased use of natural gas and clean oil processes and all these reasons. But something I think is fascinating that people also don't recognize is that California is not leading the reduction. So it's something you can kind of, speak to that a little bit and talk about, what beyond what I had just mentioned, what is driving those reductions? Kind of, are there any continued innovations that the industry is doing? And just, you talk about the transition. How do we get there? And what is fossil fuels' role in that?
Yeah, absolutely. Because frankly, the people I represent, and I've been doing this 40 years, Wayne, it's a long time. As I've seen a few things like you have. These companies are energy companies. They are invested in everything. Of course they are. I used to say to the media, transition, evolution in the energy space is DNA in our blood, right? Since horse and buggy, for Christ's sake. We have evolved in the energy space throughout time. And that is continuing even more rapidly. This idea of hydrogen as a potential, renewable diesel. Let's talk about renewable diesel. No fossil in renewable diesel. It's fats, it's oils, as you know. We had 2 refineries in California that were making gasoline in Northern California, Phillips 66, Marathon, who converted completely to renewable diesel. That is evidence of the innovation and evolution of our companies. And so as they look out, they're in this space big time. If we ever crack the nut on renewable gasoline, oh my God, that will be a game changer. And we're putting a lot of investment into that because then you're using existing infrastructure and existing vehicles, which would be a game changer. So the amount of innovation and technology, and I have to mention carbon capture and sequestration. One of our members, California Resources Corporation, CRC, part of their portfolio is certainly oil and gas. They're the largest oil and gas producer in the state of California, Chevron very close, but they're the largest oil and gas producer, a lot of oil in Kern County. That investment in oil and gas is literally supporting and paying for the largest carbon management facility called Tetravault in the Central Valley in Kern County. If that's not innovation, I don't know what is. So here you have an oil and gas company producing oil and gas and investing in the carbon management future of California in a big way. All of our companies are doing some level of CCS or any kind of using solar to power oil facilities to get this production out of the ground. There's so much innovation going on. It's mind-boggling. So I am encouraged by this transit. We should be celebrating the fact that if we could stabilize the market, have people in our industry feel like they're part of and the government wants them to be part of the solution, invites us into a collaborative conversation like I think we might be beginning to enter into. The future holds so much promise into getting California back where it needs to go. It's going to take political will. It's going to take us building trust. It's going to take, I think, groups coming together that like we have when Commissioner Sivaguna had to respond to the governor's letter when he said, Commissioner Sivaguna, go find out what's going on. Let me know. People came together, helping him respond to the governor, putting a pretty good set of things on the table that everyone felt pretty good about. about. And now it's, okay, these are great actions. These are great words. This is a great plan, but now it's urgent. We need action. We need to execute things that are articulated in that response.
Wow, I'm still flabbergasted by the concept of renewable gasoline.
I am too.
I'm not sure how that would work, but that sounds amazing.
I mean, Chevron's doing a lot in that space, as is other companies, ExxonMobil, others in this research and development. It's fascinating. It caught my attention, I think, 2 years ago when I even saw it at a conference. And I'm like, wow, renewable gasoline, that would be the game changer. Existing infrastructure, existing vehicles, existing engines, can't even imagine. So, but that gets you excited, right? I mean, these companies are thinking about all of it. And, the future holds so much but Wayne, we will not get to a future if we don't stabilize the market now and the investment coming into California so we can get from where we are to where we want to go. And, hope is not a plan, right? Technical realities get in the way of these aspirational goals if we don't address them. So we're just saying, let's come to the table. Let's address them. Now's the time. It is urgent. You cannot lose 2 more refineries. If you stay on this path, the chances of that are high. The only result of that is shortage of supply and increase of price. That's it.
Going back, because you mentioned that, and something I failed to mention earlier, is it possible that this 20% doesn't go offline? So if we do all the things that are right, will the companies reverse themselves, or will another company come in? How do you see that playing out?
I think all those are on the table. I think Phillips made their decision to not sell the refinery. They have changed their strategy to an import strategy, which certainly helps bringing supply in, but it will not replace the in-state refining capacity that is needed. And so they have sort of that approach. The Valero refinery in Benicia is debating, as we speak, to see the outcome of what these discussions are in the next 30 days. This is critical. If that capacity is taken off market, then we are going to see some serious supply constraints. If there is another couple refineries that have to make that decision, this, as I said in the beginning, Wayne, we're going to be right back on this podcast talking about a whole different scenario.
Yeah, and the out-migration of Californians will really accelerate when you get $10, $12 a gallon gas. And that's something we were just talking about the future energy. And one of our concerns is that everyone always talks about all of the above, but often that's more of a lip service. And they're not really pushing kind of this broad-based energy sources. We want low emissions. The source of those emissions shouldn't be as important as the output of we have fewer greenhouse gas emissions going into the atmosphere. And I guess, looking forward and taking a crystal ball, do you see, as we kind of do the energy transition, will fossil fuels be a part of that? And because right now they're essential for affordability and jobs and prosperity, which you've mentioned a lot of times, but is that going to stay that way as we kind of go through this transition?
Yeah, I mean, oil and gas is going to be in this mix for quite some time because the others they're certainly being developed. They're certainly increasing. And where that intersection is really important is demand. Can you meet the demand with what you have so that you keep market volatility down? And that is a combination of things. And for the near term, for even the midterm, oil and gas are definitely going to be part of that equation, just by definition, because there's just not enough of everything. So I do believe oil and gas will be there. I do believe we will continue to make it ever cleaner every day. And why do I say that? I've been doing this when we did 3 cleaner burning gasoline rollouts. I was here when we took lead out of gasoline. I was here when we took sulfur out of diesel. I was here when we now have renewable diesel. All of that evolution will continue and will get ever cleaner every day. And so as the mix continues, even with oil and gas, innovations on keeping emissions down will continue in the traditional space, as it will as we evolve into a diversified portfolio. That is absolutely happening. It is absolutely possible. And I think emissions will continue to decrease as long as we have a viable oil and gas industry that continue to provide the market today, tomorrow, in the future. Because if not, we won't ever get to this future we all want, because we will be in a state of communication crisis. It will be like the rolling blackouts on the electricity side, right? We all say laughingly, but not really, we can't have a Diablo Canyon moment on the transportation fuel side. And all that means is the governor made the right decision to keep Diablo Canyon open because it was closing. And he understood 16% of the electricity supplied cannot go off the market. We're not ready. Very similar to the transportation side. We are not ready to completely abandon oil and gas for any kind of future. We will be part of it as we bring on hydrogen, renewable diesel, which we already have, renewable natural gas, which we need more of, biodiesel, carbon capture sequestration, so you can do oil and gas with lower emissions. So there's just so much that can be done to reduce emissions, get to the future, as long as your goal is not to eliminate an industry that's going to help you get there.
And it seems to me that with some of this innovation, if you have carbon capture and sequestration, you have renewable gasoline, given that alternative energy requires you to dig up minerals, right? It's not the sun that's getting the energy directly, right? The sun has to go through minerals. So it's the same process. You have to extract something, refine it, and then you can use it for energy. And so it seems that there's possibly a point where your fossil fuels would actually be lower emissions than renewable, because if you have carbon capture and you have renewable gasoline, well, that could be quite competitive from an emissions perspective compared to solar or wind.
And that's why even you hit the life cycle analysis on the head, right? That's why you do a life cycle analysis. The only way you ever know which one is outperforming the other is if you look at the whole cradle to grave, right? Because that's what really matters. You just can't say electricity is great and is free, not if it's being, produced from a natural gas power plant or a coal plant, right? It's you got to look at the whole beginning to end, calculate what the emissions are, so you have a clear view of what you're really talking about. So you've got to be honest and open and transparent about what the emissions are from all energy sources, because every energy source has emissions. It's just a matter of what is that combination? What is that innovation? How have you reduced them? Have you put solar on your pumping unit so that now you're not even using natural gas, you're using solar or wind to power your pumping unit to get oil out of the ground? What all these innovations, are you using carbon capture sequestration in your processes? I was struck by a recent trip to Norway, because that is a country, now granted it's only 5 million people, it's not 40 million people, but as a country, the way they handle their energy cooperation is amazing. They have no landfills because they use the offshore oil and gas revenues to fund carbon capture sequestration on every incineration unit, on every landfill. So there is no, on every, biofuel to energy facility and system. So you just think of the kind of innovations people can do if we partner together. And that's not a forever strategy, but it certainly is a strategy for now, near term and midterm, as they go towards whatever that future is going to look like. And the amount of collaboration from the government, from the industry, from the businesses, from the environmental group was amazing. In fact, their question is, we don't understand why you don't do this in California. It's a beautiful plan. So I would say there's so much to learn by others who embrace business, who embrace industry, who invite us to be part of this rather than villainize the very industry that's going to help California get where it needs to go. That is what has to change. And I'm a glass half full person, so I am always trying to be as optimistic as I can, Wayne. But I do think that sometimes when we are in a crisis, as we are now, it forces people together. It forces conversations that need to be had. I would much rather plan outside a crisis, but if we're going to plan at all, I'm glad we're doing it. I think there's an opportunity here to get California back on track, as long as we've got the collective political will to do that.
We'll get back to our terrific interview in just a moment, but first, PRI's YouTube channel is must watch. By visiting youtube.com/Pacific Research 1, that's the number 1, you can watch webinars, videos, and other original content, including our new Free City Center video tours and interviews. You can watch as PRI's Wayne Winegarden tours Dignity Moves, a San Francisco nonprofit that is reimagining scalable solutions to homelessness, with founder and CEO CEO Elizabeth Funk. And you can check out Stephen Greenhut's tour of a proposed new city in rural Solano County that has generated significant interest and intrigue. You can even listen to previous episodes of Next Round Podcast. So visit PRI's YouTube channel today at youtube.com/Pacific Research 1, that's the number 1, and click the subscribe button to receive notifications about our latest content as soon as it's posted.
Would you say it's correct? Because this is my view, but I would love if if you disagree, please do. But that realism has gotten us more emissions reduction than some of the dreamers who are not taking into account the world as it is. But if we want to talk about the fact that 20% reduction in emissions is because of realism, not because of the hope, as you would say, which is not a strategy.
Yeah, I do think we've lost, realism, practicality, both of those come to play because I think we set ourselves back, in any, it could be us, it could be, other people, it could be, I'm just saying it's not, others. We set ourselves back when we are not taking a practical, realistic view as to what currently are the barriers and the technical realities that, if unaddressed, will put us on a wrong path and we'll never reach our goal. That is just a basic premise of everything we do. We have to come in with the facts and the data because they are important. You cannot have a conversation about energy without understanding where the crude oil is in California, in the Central Valley, its ability to be produced. Are there pipeline constraints? Yes, there are. Are these refineries struggling because of the additional costs continuing to be put on them, even at a time where they're already debating whether they can make a future in the state? So I mean, right now we're just, we keep throwing straws on the camel's back and the camel's barely standing up. We've got to not only pause that, but then we got to look for efficiencies to take some of those straws away in a more efficient way so that we can sustain this energy platform as we're building a new one. That is very doable. We just have to take some action. It is urgent. It does need to happen in this last part of the legislative session. I would tee up for you next Wednesday. The Assembly hearing on this is going to be a very critical conversation with literally the legislature, asking the Energy Commission and the Air Resources Board and the Department of Conservation and everyone involved in this, from the agencies, from the governor's office. Are we going to be able to make these decisions? Some of them are legislative and some of them are regulatory. And that, I think, conversation next Wednesday, I would very much hope that you cue into. I would be happy to have a conversation after we have that conversation, but I think it's going to be really critical because that's really going to send a signal how serious California is, how serious the governor is, how serious the Energy Commission, the Air Resources Board, the legislature. And if we're really serious about right-sizing this now, getting California on a better path, I think Wednesday is going to give us a clear signal.
Wow. Well, we'll keep our eyes out for that. What about cap and trade? Because that's going to be up for renewal soon. What grade would you give the policy overall? Now that you've had a few years to evaluate it, and should the state keep it going? If so, are there changes that you'd like to see?
Yes, and in fact, as that's another one out there, right? That's swirling
Right.
around everything we just talked about, and very relevant. So it's a wonderful question because we absolutely support cap and trade. We supported the last extension. We support this extension. What we want to make sure happens is that we take advantage not only of extending cap and trade, but doing some things that will make it more affordable and not add additional costs, because this is not a time to add additional costs to the program, again, to the very people that are debating whether they're going to stay in this state. So we definitely support it, but we also talk about things like making sure that the 100% industrial assistant factor stays in place post 2030. So that was, that's the continuing the AB 398, 100% industrial assistance factor. We think that needs to happen in the cap and trade program. We definitely want to make sure all facets of this industry, whether it's refining, whether it's production, whether it's pipeline, or whether it's renewable diesel, that all of that is included in what we call Table 9-2, which actually is half the cap decline rate, much like the cement industry, because that will help on the cost side. We'll still be in the program, still be part of cap and trade, but by being placed placed in what we call highly trade exposed, which we are. The energy industry is highly trade exposed, just like cement. We have to be in that category for this program to be cost effective so that we can, again, continue it into the future and take some of the cost burden off of the program so it can be effective. And there's other things that, like we talked CCS, we think it should include a tool to really capitalize on encouraging CCS as part of the cap and trade program. And there's other factors as well. But, one interesting idea is sort of like a refinery investment fund, if you might. So some of the cap and trade revenue that we, of course, are responsible for. I mean, we're already paying into the program as part of cap and trade, but that some of that is reinvested in the refinery for efficiency, for modernization, for, transition elements. So again, we think the program should continue, but this is a moment to take advantage, improve upon it, make sure that you're not adding an additional cost burden, especially for the people that are debating whether they're going to be staying here, and then go into the future. So it's a lot in conversation, as you know. We're going to be thinking those things are extremely important to the conversation, and so you'll be hearing us talk about them.
Well, this has really been a fascinating discussion, but to close out, and we call our podcast Next Round due to our proximity to California's wine region. So what we typically ask is our guests is, what are you drinking nowadays? Is it wine, beer, or something else? Because you need something to unwind from our crazy politics.
Mr. Winegarden, I like the first part of your name. I even like wine in a garden. No, I think, I love a glass of wine.
Wonderful. Again, thank you so much for joining us today.
Wait, thank you so much for having me. It's just been an honor.
If you like this episode, please tell your friends and subscribe to PRI's podcast at iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, and Spotify. And when you're on these platforms, don't forget to give us a big 5 stars. If you don't subscribe to any of these, you can still listen on PRI's YouTube page, youtube.com/Pacific Research 1. That's the number 1. Thanks for listening. I'm Rowena Ichon. Hope you'll come back again for Next Round with PRI.